Welcome back. An interesting thing happened on the way to the forum today. The ruling coalition of the LDP and the Komeito, tight as they were beforehand, you're seeing cracks in that facade. Michael, you're watching it too. Some interesting dynamics are finally starting to come to the surface.
We're seeing finally with the declaration of what the policy programs are, the manifestos as they're called, for the upper house election, the House of Councillors election that's happening on July the 10th. Some very subtle but nevertheless significant differences between the platforms of the two ruling coalition partners.
In the past, they try and downplay these because the coalition is rather important, and public opinion polls have shown that there is strength there, but in an election, they have to kind of differentiate themselves.
In this case, the differentiation seems to be based upon what I identified in January as the fundamental, really the one most wonderful and bizarre part of this election, which is that if the Komeito fully cooperates with the LDP in the way that it has in the past, in helping the LDP get all of its members elected, it will be complicit in its own disempowerment. Mm-hmm. If the Komeito voters show up in the district elections and vote as they've been told in the past for the LDP candidate, the LDP will elect enough members from the House of Councillors to have more than 50% of the seats in that body, mm-hmm. which means that it has more than 50% in the House of Reps and more than 50% in the House of Councillors for the first time since 1989. Mm-hmm. 27 years it's been ruling in coalition with other people, having to deal with other parties.
How distasteful.
But just it's annoying.
Annoying, right.
Even though
hamstringing.
It's been hamstringing them. They have within their sights just a few more weeks that they'll have to listen to the Komeito. And if the Komeito voters go to the polls and vote as they've been told in the past for the LDP candidate, that requirement disappears. Right. And the Komeito will be complicit in it.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing. And that, I think, has finally been processed in the Komeito. And you're seeing them responding to pressures from within their own base saying, you know, this is not right. Mm-hmm. And we see in terms of very basic programs, such as the program having to do, the major program of the LDP, because it's in their 1955 declaration, we're going to revise the Constitution. The Komeito will discuss the situation, but the words revision, Constitution, not in their manifesto.
So this isn't really a fracture, and we don't expect or anticipate a fracture, but the fact that now we are in election mode, these differences really become much more pronounced.
Well, it certainly is going to be harder. The Komeito base is very, very unified and votes very strongly.
Let's talk just a little bit about their base. Komeito, I get this question asked all the time. Komeito, what is their political philosophy? Why are they powerful? Why has the LDP formed a coalition with them? And what's the difference or the similarity between them and the religious organization Soka Gakkai?
And let us be frank. It is the front organization.
It's a political arm.
The Soka Gakkai.
But it's not supposed to be.
It's not supposed to be, and there are people who vote Komeito who are not members of the Soka Gakkai. Mm-hmm. Some of them are convinced by their Soka Gakkai relatives who keep bombarding them with telephone calls saying, well, you vote for our candidate. Yes, but also some people see them as a way of getting leverage on the government, a way of pushing the LDP without voting for the LDP. Voting for the opposition, the DP, you're not going to get anything.
Right.
But here, if you vote for the Komeito, because it's the coalition partner, has leverage. Mm-hmm. It's only through the Komeito that the current administration has a majority in the House of Councillors. Without the Komeito, the LDP does not have sufficient seats.
Right.
But that's going to change in this election. They will have 50% in both houses. They will be back to the dominant single party that can do whatever it wants without a coalition partner if the Komeito votes for them.
But that's not your prediction.
I believe that they will vote for him because there's no time to coordinate. True, they could do it. They could tell their followers, teach teach the LDP a lesson. You know, vote for an opposition candidate. Don't let the LDP district win that district.
Right.
There are two problems. One is the time. You just don't have time to coordinate. You're only a few weeks away, even though it's the Soka Gakkai is a highly disciplined organization. And it can, if you look at the way that it uses the proportional list in order to exhibit its powers of control and its powers of influence, it's a thing of wonder. Their use of the proportional list, which they do simply in order to demonstrate their power, is amazing. And if anybody wants to talk about it with me, write me an email. But the salient point here is the opposition contains the Communist Party. The alliance, one of the members, is the Communists. And the Communists are the deadly enemies of the Komeito. They have the same targets. The persons with less than a college education who are struggling, and the Komeito and the Soka Gakkai in the 1960s and 70s took in a lot of their base from that group, and that's the natural group of the communists who are the workers' party,
the laborers, right?
The workers' day laborers' party. So these two are absolutely visceral enemies, and there's no way at that point, if there's going to be a unified candidate, which we do have in 32 districts, that there's no way that the Komeito voters will vote there.
What are they going to do about that?
That's the thing. They're caught in this incredible catch-22 where they are about to disempower themselves, but there's nothing, they don't have an alternative.
Is there supposed to be, I'm sure there is in the backroom closets, a tit for tat? I mean, you're going to vote for us and we're going to support you, but even though the numbers aren't going to reveal this support for the coalition, you're my guy.
Oh, well, that's the only thing they have to rely on now, is the goodwill of the LDP, because they will no longer be providing them with the majority in the House of Councillors. They will no longer have that leverage on them. They can't twist the arm of the LDP in order to get the things that they want done. They got out of the LDP with that leverage, this carve-out of the tax rise, which is now not going to happen at all, but they did enforce on the LDP the concept that foodstuffs and daily necessities should be taxed at an 8% rate when everything else goes to 10%. There has to be a lower tax level. They insisted on that, and they were able, with their crowbar of the House of Councillors majority, to get that. They will no longer have that tool.
Well, the Prime Minister has already announced a kind of a low threshold. I will win 61 seats. The LDP will have 61 seats in the upcoming upper house election. I stake my reputation on that. He's going to get that even if he walks backward throughout the entire election campaign.
What we're looking at is a situation where there is really no logical way that the LDP could lose this election.
Well, they can lose some of the seats that they already hold, but they're still going to far exceed the 50% of the houses that are up for, or the seats that are up for grabs.
And if you look at the results from the 2013 House of Councillors election, which had the poll numbers for the various parties at approximately where they are now, the LDP gained 31 seats at the expense mostly of the Democratic Party of Japan, and the DPJ lost 27. We have basically the same kind of seat arrangements up for grabs in this 2010 election. This set of seats is the last place where Japan has what is supposed to be a two-party system, with the two main conservative centrist parties having approximately the same number of seats. If looking at 2013, that's going to mean an absolute debacle for the DP, and that's what's set up. There's going to be a huge rise in the number of seats that the ruling coalition controls and the LDP controls by itself.
Okay, if everybody knows this at about the same level that we know this, then that tells you that they really must scramble, and they need to do some things that are like outside of the bounds of what they would even conceive as something that's worthwhile. For example, forming an alliance with the opposition parties. But probably they might take it even a step further if, in fact, their political livelihood, their existence, really is at stake.
Unfortunately, the only party that could matter which is the Democratic Party, has it's scrambling, but it has as its leadership persons who are not entirely frightened by genteel decline or even a genteel downfall. Party leader Okada led the party to an absolute disastrous result in the 2005 election, the postal reform election against Koizumi, who was running against his own party in terms of fighting for reform. He was fighting a two-sided battle and defeated both sides handily. Okada was absolutely ineffective, and we're seeing absolutely not one iota of more energy out of him than we saw in 2005. There is no way that he is going to ignite the electorate to saying, wow, this is a historic election that needs to be decided in a certain way, and I have to show up to the polls to be a participant in it. No, it's the general sense that everybody gets is that this is an election that's going to set possibly a new record low in terms of voter participation, because, Abenomics isn't working, but what were the alternatives? Yeah, we don't want to have the nuclear power plants restarted, but what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives? Yeah. And this leadership group of the Democratic Party is not that alternative.
Every time we see something teed up, for example, the no confidence motion that the Prime Minister faced 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's teed up, he's on camera, and he just really doesn't knock it home. And it's such a disappointment because everybody likes to see a vigorous fight, and a two-party system would be probably a good thing to happen, but it just keeps, escaping, people's imagination. Let me ask you, though, what's going on with political genius Ichiro Ozawa in the context of all of this that's going on? You don't see much about it.
You don't necessarily see a lot of him because he's really basically so unpopular. He's burdened with 30 years of suspicion that he's dirty. The fact that when prosecutors actually got their hands on all of his files and all the files of his political support organizations, they found nothing. And they, in fact, found so little of anything, they didn't file charges. And the only reason he went to trial was because of this very peculiar and very, anarchic system that they have of citizens actually being able to indict people. Without that, the normal procedures of indictment and the Tokyo prosecutor's office would never have done anything towards him. He nevertheless labors under this. He also has some personal behaviors that drive everybody crazy. Right. He's a hypochondriac of the top level, so he's constantly wearing masks at inappropriate moments when he should be facing the cameras and such. He's a coward personally. When the tsunami destroyed his prefecture, he wasn't there. First he fled Tokyo in order to get away from the Fukushima nuclear power disaster. He fled to the west. But then when he came back, he didn't visit his own home prefecture of Iwate until January of the next year. His own district. Right. Okay? He's simply not someone who has the personality of a leader. And people hate him for that. But his mind, his thoughts, his reasoning has always been absolutely the best possible thinking about the politics of Japan.
That's right. And probably, this goes for politics and in business too, the nail that sticks out, you're going to receive that hammerhead real quick. And I think people who espouse to be leaders in this country, and also those who are holding positions of power, like with Masazoi, the governor, they are constantly under attack. It takes a special breed of person to survive that. He was a kingmaker. For many years, he was identified as the kingmaker, and probably at the level of a Kissinger within Japanese politics, he's a genius in terms of how things operate and how to maneuver, but he's been marginalized.
But he is at least smart enough to be one of the four parties, to have his party as one of the four parties that is sponsoring these joint candidates in the alliance in the House of Councillors.
So maybe his fingerprints are kind of...
His fingerprints will be on it, and all parties want to have his brain, they just don't want his person nearby.
Right.
Because he really does understand policy.
We know people like that.
We know people like that. But he really, because of his, at the outset, relationship with the other great, now they call him genius, Tanaka Kakue.
Right.
And what a strange
Well, he was
turn
his
of it-
protege, wasn't he?
Yes, he was the protege. And when Tanaka went to trial, Ozawa went to every single court appearances, over 100 times. He stopped whatever he was doing and went to the courthouse to sit in for the entire proceedings. That level of loyalty to a person who's seen as the ultimate avatar of corruption. Nowadays, we've seen in the last couple months a resurgence of Tanaka was the greatest. That's been a really amazing thing. And maybe Ozawa will be able to ride some of that. We have Ishihara writing in the persona of Tanaka, a defense of himself. And it's called Tensai, Genius. And it's a huge bestseller. And there are all kinds of books coming out saying what Japan needs now is Tanaka. I'm sure Ozawa Ichiro is thinking, yeah, you got one right here.
Sorry, we go off tangent frequently, but these things really make sense. Our lead on this episode was the coalition parties, the Komeito and the LDP, little differences that are coming up because of the election, but it just spills over into lots of things. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned.